Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Midweek in the City, where we ask questions and we are always rewarded by thinking together better. We sometimes find something that might look like an answer, but we major on the questions here because Jesus said, ask, seek, and knock. And when we do this together, we can inform one another and begin to think about some important issues together in a way that we could not do alone. And so I'm glad you're with us this evening. We've got a very special guest this evening, and we will introduce her in a moment. I do want to say that we are going to be going through mid-May for Midweek in the City. And so we've still got a few weeks left of this kind of exploration of questions, and we're glad you're here. We hope before too long to begin meeting in person again, but for now we're going to have to wait just a little while longer. Be patient, and we will do this in person like we used to do in a few weeks. Now, after tonight's interview, if you will jump on over to Zoom, click the link and jump over to the Zoom call, there will be a Q&A at which time that you'll be able to interact. We will not allow it before then to interact on this subject matter. So give some attention to that, and I hope you can join us for that Zoom call. I do want to introduce our guest. Our guest tonight is Lisa Deem. She is a scholar, a scholar of the Middle Ages. She holds a PhD in medieval art history from the University of Chicago. She spent some time in academia, but now she is a full-time writer. And her writing has appeared in Christianity Today, among other publications. She also has a book coming out called 3,000 Miles to Jesus, Pilgrimage as a Way of Life for Spiritual Seekers. And this we're going to focus in on this kind of thinking tonight of pilgrimage, drawing upon the wisdom of our friends from the Middle Ages as we are now in this Lenten season. We are headed toward Easter. This is a time of reflection, and we are going to pursue that tonight with Lisa Deem. Welcome, Lisa. I'm so glad you could be here with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, we're here again, as always, joined by Megan Langen, who's the Associate Minister for Single Adults, and she and I are going to pepper Lisa Deem with questions, and we're going to get smarter as a result of that. So let's dive right into this.
Yeah.
Megan.
So Lisa, I read your article in Christianity Today, and I just thought it was so unique and so cool, and it was perfect timing as we're journeying through Lent and towards Easter. And so I'm just so glad that we somehow crossed paths via
Absolutely.
the interwebs. But thank you for joining us. Tell us first of all how you got to this subject, how you became interested in this, and how you kind of stumbled into this study of medieval faith traditions.
Oh, sure. Well, I began my studies in the Middle Ages in graduate school. It was the late medieval art history that I studied, mostly 15th century. And this was a time when a lot of the art and literature was made to aid in a person's personal devotion, a personal Christian devotion. Now, I didn't end up staying in academia, but I discovered that the art and the history that I studied really stayed with me. And even more that it was kind of speaking to my own faith. So it became less of an academic subject and more of a help to my faith. And so I began writing about the art and history of the medieval era from more of a personal faith-based perspective, kind of writing spiritual formation. And that's what I do today. Because for me, the entree into spiritual formation really begins with the faith traditions of the Christian past. So kind of started academic, and then I really became personally invested.
And this is so intriguing because in order to go forward, we're being asked to look backwards. In this case, 1,000 years, 500 to 1,000 to 1,500 years, and it is an idea that is somewhat foreign to us today. We want to go forward. We want to look to the future. We want to plan for the future. I was in a discussion recently in which the time orientation of Westerners was in focus, and we talked about different cultures having different time orientations, and Westerners tend to be very future oriented. In other words, we're always on the way to somewhere. We're looking ahead. Yeah. But you and other voices are asking us to look back. And this kind of cuts against the grain, I guess.
Yeah. The theologian Robert Webber, whose work I've admired, he sort of was one of the people who started the ancient future faith movement. I remember one of his sayings is that the road to the future goes through the past.
That's a paradox, but I can see that. And by the way, you have already ingratiated yourself to our minister of worship, who really harkens to Robert Webber's thinking, the late Robert Webber. So that's good stuff. And so your own faith, what's the footprint of the Middle Ages on your own spiritual journey, your own sense of Christianity?
Yeah. Well, for me, the study of history, and my area is the Middle Ages, it reminds me of how deep our faith, the Christian faith, really goes. Very deep in time, and deep as in, across the whole world and all time periods. And I love discovering how people in centuries past, how they loved God, how they wrote about God, how they wrangled and wrestled with their faith. That gives me a sense of having roots. It ties me to the historical church, and it just reminds me that I'm part of something really big, the glorification of God through the ages. The big story that God is working through time and history, and that we are all a part of that and swept up into that. And that really encourages me in my faith.
It's so interesting to me that you're talking about how looking to the Middle Ages, looking to that past, can give you a sense of the grandness of God, that He is large enough to be and robust enough to withstand whatever pressures and whatever obstacles are affecting you today, and that is so. It's actually very encouraging. And if I may follow up on that just a little bit, I'm often struck by how we view the Middle Ages in popular culture, and that is the modern world, including the church, often looks back. We see. Again, the church is certainly impacted by popular culture, and we talk about it as if we're separated from it, but that's not really how culture works. We have to be in it if we're even going to be conversant at all with our times. But we tend to look at the Middle Ages, and we see a world of, in our movies and our thinking, we see a world of ignorance, a world of grunge, just grimy, just physically. We think of the Middle Ages as just being covered with this fine layer of silicate powder, I guess, and it is just, everything is disease-ridden. People are superstitious. The world is flat, which is, even the Greeks knew that wasn't true. But we see a complete denial of the physical reality, but also we see that we think we're so much more sophisticated now, and they didn't know how to face problems or reason like we do today, and we say, well, thank goodness for the Enlightenment, and so forth. But how did the world of Julian of Norwich or Catherine of Siena or Thomas Aquinas, these gigantic bastions of thought and reason and spirituality, how did they slip away from us and we just relegate their age to a dark ages? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think what you said, we see it as that. And I just want to, before I kind of dive into this a little bit, just let you know that they did not believe that the world was flat in the Middle Ages. They knew that the world was round and portrayed it that way on their maps.
I'm so glad to hear that said in a full-throated way.
It's really modern people that have a problem with the round Earth.
Wow.
I hear many flat earthers out there today, and that is not a medieval concept. But to answer your question, the bad rap that the Middle Ages has gotten has really been with us for centuries. So I think it's something that we have inherited. Okay. And the name itself, Middle Ages, we may not think about it consciously, but it implies that it's just a time period that's in between two others.
Okay.
In between the ancient world and the modern world, or the Renaissance. And that it's just a place kind of to pass through as we go.
Like a rickety bridge.
Yeah, from one great era to another great era.
Okay.
And the term actually, I think Middle Ages or Middle Period was first used in something like 1469. So at the very kind of end of the medieval period itself, and then became a lot more in use during the Renaissance, during the 16th and 17th centuries. And so it's really an arbitrary way to see a time period by other people in history. And just a label that we use. Yeah. For a period that's actually very, very long and very diverse, just like the modern age is long and diverse, so is the Middle Ages. But it's just something I think that we have inherited that way of thinking about it, just kind of steadily through the centuries.
And the
middle.
Yeah.
It is. I never thought about the fact that the term itself implies just a placeholder, between these two great epochs.
A good way to put it. And that it's periodization. It's really necessary, and it's with us, and it's the way we kind of organize history, but it's also very arbitrary.
Mm-hmm. True. I think Tolkien may have had it better. He would refer to the epochs of Middle Earth as the second age, and just different ages, rather than putting something in the middle or whatever.
Right. So it's always had. I think that the people that used it were created it for that reason, to kind of glorify their own era in history and kind of put the past behind them. And that's a little bit what we like to do.
That's very interesting.
Well,
I think we also, in a way, love the Middle Ages because it does play a big role in a lot of our movies and television shows and video games. If you just think of the Lord of the Rings, it's not maybe truly medieval, but medieval-esque.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Era. And I think that we both hate the Middle Ages, but we also love it because we keep turning to it.
Kind of has a fascination for us.
Yes,
and
fascination, and we romanticize it. And that's not helpful either.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, the medieval times restaurant, or the things that the way we see this era portrayed on TV. Yeah, it's almost comical, or
Yeah, exactly.
We've
comedy
simplified it to the point where we've taken the depth out of it. Yeah,
and it occurs to me that I remember hearing acts of worldwide terrorism being described as medieval, as if somehow we have advanced and we no longer practice in our nice and tidy world. We no longer practice savagery. That's, I don't think anything could be further from the truth than that. And yet we like to distance ourselves from violence in that way.
Right. Quick look at the 20th century, shows us that, in terms of acts of savagery and terrorism, that, the 20th century has more than enough of that.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah. It's just something where we, through habit and inheritance, we kind of put these feelings or fears in this little box in a way called the Middle Ages, to convince us probably, like you said, that we're moving forward.
Well, having said that, having dispensed with the myth, I hope, not once and for all, I'm sure, that the Middle Ages has nothing to offer us but superstition and grime and ignorance. Let's try to mine in these few moments what wonders there are from that.
Yeah, and for those that are listening to this, Lisa writes of pilgrimage in this era, and she writes of the spiritual practices of Christians in this era. And so in her article, that I'll send a link to this article so y'all can have that. And then in her book, we're kind of taking the journey with these believers to their pilgrimage, often to Jerusalem. And in her article that is in Christianity Today, Lisa, you situate this in our season of Lent. And so how can we learn about Lent from medieval Christians and this idea of pilgrimage? Can you unpack that some of that for us?
Yeah. And now we're getting to the stuff that I really love here. When we're in Lent and we think about Jesus going to Jerusalem, right? When Jesus entered Jerusalem for the last time, he went as a pilgrim. For that last part of his journey, he took the Pilgrim's Road from Jericho to Jerusalem. So, he himself, Jesus, was a pilgrim.
I'm so sorry. I just have to interject. I've never thought of it in that light. Yeah. Lisa, that's fascinating.
Yeah, he's a pilgrim in a very historical sense of making that trek that was common to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And also, a pilgrim in terms of being sent to earth by God.
Indeed.
So kind of a double pilgrim.
Wow.
But if you look right now at just kind of the historical aspect, we during Lent are called to follow Jesus to Jerusalem. We're taking our own journey to the cross. Like our thoughts turn to what happened in Jerusalem, especially during Passion Week, and we linger at the cross with Jesus. So we are making our own pilgrimage to Jerusalem. I'm not the first one to talk about Lent in terms of a journey. We often hear it said, the journey of Lent.
Yes.
But very specifically, it could be called a pilgrimage. And in the medieval era, Christians often took a walking pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Now, not necessarily during Lent, although sometimes, but just as it was just an important devotional practice to take a physical walking pilgrimage. And a pilgrim going from somewhere in Europe, like France or England, would have walked and sailed a little bit, about 3,000 miles to get to Jerusalem. And in this practice of pilgrimage, their physical pilgrimage, I think we can learn about aspects of our spiritual pilgrimage as we go to Jerusalem with Jesus. Because physical pilgrimage is always intertwined with a more spiritual journey. Inner and outer are combined into one kind of journey. So for example, we can learn from their journey about the time that it took, about slowing down on the journey, because it took them, like I said, about 3 months each way to get to Jerusalem. We learn about the patience and the perseverance required to make a journey like that.
Yes.
The faith that it took to make a journey, the faith that they could make it through the length of the journey and the hardships to get to Jerusalem. All those things I think can teach us about, maybe the mindset or the heart that we need to make our own pilgrimage during Lent.
That's so beautiful. It really is.
And you write in your book, and you remind us, from what I've read so far, that we are, whether we know it or not, or acknowledge it or not, we're pilgrims in our own right. It may not be an intentional pilgrimage that we're, journeying from point A to point B, or we're setting out on a path, like Frodo or something like that. But we're pilgrims towards heaven, and we know that as believers. And you point that out in your book. And I found this encouraging, that throughout, you highlight the difficulty that the path has for these pilgrims in the Middle Ages, but just like they knew where their path was leading to Jerusalem, that we know where our path ends in Christ and in heaven. And so that was just an encouraging way to reframe pilgrimage in our own lives. And we don't necessarily do this all the time. I mean, I know this is still a spiritual practice for Christians and for Muslims and other faith traditions as well, but most of us aren't going, as much as we might like to, aren't going to go on a full-blown pilgrimage. But how could we reinstitute pilgrimage in our own spiritual life? Maybe hopping on a plane, maybe not. But what are your thoughts on how we can do that?
Right. I would love to hop on a plane sometime and walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain, or part of the way to Jerusalem anyway. Yeah. But I think the key is what you just mentioned, Megan, which is looking at our whole life as a pilgrimage. Mm-hmm. So when I started reading more in depth about the pilgrim's journeys, they had just caught my eye. And so I started reading. And I was reminded of the several passages in the Bible that talk about our journey as believers. And so specifically, Hebrews chapter 11, and that's where the author of Hebrews is going through the great cloud of witnesses that traveled before us, all these people that had faith before Jesus even came. Yeah. And the author of Hebrews says that these people had left their home, and they were just strangers passing through the earth on their way to a better country. Yeah. So these, and that we are like them, right? These are examples of our faith. And so the Bible really sets out an identity for us as pilgrims, that this earth is not our home. I mean, it's a wonderful and beautiful place, and we're here for a reason, but that it's not our ultimate home, and that we're all on a journey to a better country. And that Jesus has gone ahead of us and prepared, the book of Hebrews says, prepared a city for us.
Well, yeah. And again, you keep pointing out that this language of journeying has been right before our eyes in the Bible. And I've failed to connect that. I mean, the Bible says that Abraham was looking for a city, that Moses left the comforts of Pharaoh's court. I mean, in Hebrews 11, I mean, it talks about journeying outward. And that's just amazing.
Outward and inward, because
outward and inward, right? Yeah, right.
Because they were, they're looking for a better country, and
geographically outward, spiritually inward. I guess. Yeah,
they're looking for the heavenly country.
Yes,
because
indeed.
This is not our home. And so when I study something like medieval pilgrimage, for me it helps me, and maybe I hope all of us, to maybe understand our biblical identity as pilgrims a little better, make it a little richer, a little deeper, to understand, well, what might this journey that we're all on be like?
Yeah.
This journey through life. Yeah. So we, without getting on a plane, we're all on this journey every day.
We're already there if we would open our eyes to that.
We're on the path, and every day we're taking steps towards our final destination. And we hope it will be many years in the future. But that sense that we're, we know where our hope lies, and that we're pilgrims on our way there.
This whole COVID season, and you point this out, can parallel give us a parallel pilgrimage too, sort of a double Lent, I think would be the phraseology there. We have a friend, Lane Io, took a pilgrimage some years back in Spain, and in fact, I guess it was right before you came, we did a midweek in the city early in the days of the pandemic about looking at COVID, leveraging the time of COVID for pilgrimage, seeing it as a pilgrimage. And that's, I don't think we can get enough of that idea. So would you expand on this double Lent idea?
Yeah. Well, the phrase double Lent, and that was in my article in Christianity Today. And what I specifically meant when I said that was that a pilgrim in the medieval era going from, say, France or England and walking to Jerusalem, that typically the journey would take about 3 months each way. So to Jerusalem, that's about 12 weeks. And Lent is 6 weeks. So I kind of called it, they walked the duration of a double Lent. So if we think Lent is long, right, it's a little hard to make it through Lent, then, think about the pilgrims that walked a double Lent. But, even more than that, it's the double Lent, or more, I think I say in the article, because the whole past year has seemed like, to many people, I think, a Lenten season.
Yeah.
Where we're confronted with the fragility of life, things we can't control, where we're thinking more about suffering, where we have spent a lot of time maybe in isolation, and it seems like we've given up so much.
Yes.
That these themes that characterize Lent also, can characterize. We could say they characterize the pandemic, and it's like Lent just sort of never ended. Now, of course, it did, because we had Easter, Jesus is risen. So I don't want to take away from that, but just that the whole time has been a very long pilgrimage that we're still on.
And that is what it has felt like in times.
Truly.
This kind of almost like we're walking in circles. Like apparently we never made it to Jerusalem, as if we circled back.
It's a labyrinth gone horribly wrong. No, I'm kidding, but it has felt like a very, very long trek.
And you, in your book, you have 3 kind of examples of pilgrims that you reference, and Marjorie Kemp was one that really stuck out to me. And could you unpack her story a little bit, and maybe why she might represent particular for her long journey? How might that speak to our kind of double Lent, or our kind of circular Lenten season that we have?
Marjorie Kemp is so interesting. She's probably the best known of the pilgrims I talk about in the book. She's a little bit known outside of academic circles, because she was in the 15th century. She was a lay woman, so not part of the clergy or anything, and a mystic, meaning that she had close experiences of God and wanted to have a more intimate relationship with him. And so she took off for Jerusalem, and actually her whole story is so interesting, because she had trouble with her companions on the way, and they didn't get along, and her companions abandoned her at one point, and her story is just full of difficulties. She crossed the Alps in the middle of winter to get to Venice, and then the pilgrims usually sailed from Venice to the Holy Land. And when she got to Venice, it seems like she got there a little bit too early. It was still winter. And so she had to wait about 13 weeks for one of the pilgrims' galleys, one of the ships, to sail to the Holy Land.
Good
because
heavens.
they sailed once or twice a year. So built into her journey was like a 13-week layover in Venice. And of course, there are worse places for a layover because Venice had a lot of splendor, maybe even more in the 15th century as now. But, for someone that's on her way somewhere, that's kind of a major holdup. And it almost seems like the journey just stops as she is stuck waiting in Venice for a long time.
Yeah.
So her journey and the Lenten experience of her journey was really doubled by that. And to me, it kind of speaks to how our journeys seem to have ground to a halt during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. We always want to rush somewhere. We're on our way somewhere. We have things to do in our spiritual life and just our everyday life. But then the pandemic came along and sort of forced us to slow down or to be in this in-between place where we feel stuck. We can't go back, really. Okay. We can't go forward. And it kind of made us slow down, whether we wanted to or not, and maybe kind of take stock of, our lives, of what's going on in the world. So it was kind of a lesson in Lent, in a way, in terms of just slowing down, realizing that we don't control every part of our journey, and that it was very frustrating for me, for all of us, to be kind of grounded during the pandemic.
So stop.
It's not also though it's not a bad idea to be forced to slow down a little bit and ask and kind of take stock of what's going on.
And it sounds like stopping is, the stopping of forward momentum may be a part of that sometimes.
Yes. Right.
Just as she had to stop for that layover.
Yes. Pauses are a part of pilgrimage.
Pauses, yeah.
And that's a hard lesson for all of us to learn because we are forward looking and we are in a hurry and we don't want to pause or stop.
That's right.
It's a hard lesson.
Yeah. And I know in your book, you discussed a little bit, your example of your pilgrimage of journeying home for Christmas, and that might have been a less glamorous journey and those things and filled with grumbling. And I can relate to that. But I know for me, especially, after a few months of COVID, I kind of reached that period of not taking pause and not taking stock, but just grumbling and almost panicking, really. Not being able to go backward and kind of redo all of this, or not being able to move forward and feeling stuck. And I think it took me a while for the Lord to kind of finally get to me and say, hey, obviously this is outside of your control. This doesn't mean that this isn't a part of the journey. While COVID was not a part of your plan, it is a part of your journey, and it is not without meaning, and it's not without purpose, just because you're not moving forward at the pace that maybe you were hoping to. And so when I read that, your example of grumbling in our journey versus looking to the Lord on our journey was encouraging. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome. Yeah. I totally agree that the pause is part of the journey. The part that's hard to accept sometimes.
And that happens in our lives outside of COVID as well. I mean, these pauses happen in so many different ways, but if we can reframe them as positive things.
Yeah. And I really, this is helpful to me personally, Lisa. I'm really thinking right now at the second about that idea of pause. That is because there are some pauses that are maddening to me. And right now, in my life, as we sit here, and I got to go back and relook at that. I absolutely do. I've got to do that.
The pauses, and also just how long a journey may take.
Yeah, that too.
I'm always appalled at how long it takes me to learn something that God wants to show me, or just how, I know it's a lifetime, but still, it's how slow this goes sometimes can be disheartening. But a true pilgrimage is slow, and it does meander, and there's nothing rushed about a pilgrimage.
Okay. I'm soaking it in. I am. I'm really, this is needed.
Yeah.
Greatly needed.
And that's sanctification too. I mean, that's, we think of sanctification as this kind of ever evolving, forward moving thing, but that's not always how it feels.
That's right.
Right.
And you talk about this a little bit in your book, but what spiritual practices have you used during Lent to help prepare you for Easter? I know in your article you talk about, people wishing each other a happy Easter or saying Christ is risen, and you're like, but not yet. We're still in Lent. That's important for us.
That is great. Yeah. Again, there's the forward momentum that looking the forward time orientation.
Yeah, a little bit too fast on that one for me.
What practices have you used in your Lent journey?
Not to belabor this point, but one thing I'm doing right now, I'm co-leading a retreat with another person, and a Lenten retreat online. And we are we have structured the retreat as a pilgrimage, as kind of literally as a pilgrimage. The idea of leaving where we are, or stepping out from where we are, and taking a journey towards a more intimate relationship or reconnection with God, something that we might have been missing in the pandemic. And Lent is a good time to, kind of regain that and put our focus back on God. So we have structured that as a pilgrimage and going step by step and thinking about things like, where am I now? Spiritually, how am I?
Yeah.
And where do I want to be? And then thinking about all the things that a pilgrim might have to think about. What are the things I need to leave behind or let go of for this journey? And what are the difficulties I'm facing to get there? And things like that. And every week we consider a different aspect of the journey. So that helps me to slow down a little bit. I mean, it's helping, I'm co-leading the retreat, but it's really helping me to remember to think about it as a journey, which, Lent is like a mini journey, compared to the journey of life. But if you think about wanting to reach the empty tomb on Easter morning, or wanting to feel closer to God, or maybe just to develop a better habit, a better prayer habit, think of that as the journey you're on, or the destination you want to reach. And then think that you're moving there step by step, and that you're not there yet, but that it's ahead of you. Yeah. And aside from that, aside from really trying to use the pilgrimage motif, I just try to increase prayer and confession and introspection, to really kind of take stock of where I am. I feel like it's not where I need to be. Again, I'm always using the language of journey, but when I take stock of myself, I realize this isn't where I need to be or want to be or thought I would be.
Yeah.
So where is it that I need to go?
And you mentioned prayer as a journey in itself, or as kind of its own miniature practice and pilgrimage too. Yeah. And I had never considered it in those terms.
Me either.
Yeah. Could you unpack that just a little? I know we're probably running short on time. That idea of prayer as a journey in itself.
Yeah. Well, a few mystics and theologians from the Middle Ages kind of do talk about prayer as its own pilgrimage. And one of them was Saint Augustine, who probably some of us are familiar with, the Bishop of Hippo. And he wrote about going into his own little room, the room of the heart, to pray, and crying out to God and reaching Jerusalem, kind of all within the confines of his heart. So as sort of a journey. And another great figure, Saint Bonaventure, talked about the journey of contemplative prayer. And that's kind of like more of a silent kind of praying, where you're sitting with God. You don't necessarily have to use words, but you're just in God's presence. That kind of a contemplative prayer takes the person who's praying deep within to the interior Jerusalem. And he uses that phrase, we reach the interior Jerusalem. So it's like inside of us, when we pray, we're going to the Jerusalem of our heart. We're meeting Jesus there, deep within, just like a pilgrim going to Jerusalem. And, we're trying to leave the outer world behind, kind of leaving where we are and journeying within. And so that's a meaningful way for me to think about prayer.
These words that you're using, Lisa, are so beautiful and tender, and they are reaching me very deeply at this moment. They really are, and I know others as well are hearing that in much the same way. We must hear words like this. These are high and holy, and again, tender words, and I thank you so much for that, and for the thinking that you're doing along these lines, because we are a vulnerable people, and we have been, I think, probably more vulnerable than we realize as a society, and certainly as an American society, very vulnerable. We've been through, we've been shaken a whole lot in various ways.
Yes.
And you can point to different demographic groups and say, these folks have, and these folks have all faced traumas and so forth.
Yeah.
And we are each really, I think, precipitously poised on an edge, and so we need to hear words like this, and I hope that we can take this and we can infuse this into our lives, and then as a church and churches, we can put balm on the soul of our society. We are going to draw this to a close, and we are so grateful for your time. We are so grateful that you sat with us here, and you helped us to think about these things.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you. Keep writing, keep thinking. And again, everybody, the book is 3,000 Miles to Jesus. And remind me of the subtitle again.
Pilgrimage as a Way of Life for Spiritual Seekers.
Pilgrimage as a Way of Life for Spiritual Seekers. Oh, wow. I love that so much. We look forward to more from you. We look forward to how you are going to be bringing out treasures from the Middle Ages more and more, because we need that. Thank you, Lisa.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
We hope that you will, everybody, that you will get on this Zoom call. Are you able to join the Zoom call?
Yes.
Okay, great. So Lisa will be there, and get ready for some moments of conversation that will continue with Lisa Deem. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you, everybody, for tuning into Midweek in the City. Good night.